Hello friends, in this video, I'll tell you stories from Reddit that will give you goosebumps. Some secrets are too terrifying to tell. Until now. I have never shared this story that I can remember. It sometimes gives me nightmares. Maybe if I share it, I can let some of it go. It's a very long story. I worked as a temp when I first graduated from college, about 30 years ago. As anyone who has worked as a temp knows, it's a diverse pool of people you come across as coworkers. One of my coworkers was a woman from another state. I won't mention names or states, so any details are changed for obvious reasons. She was an older lady, and she was missing an eye. She didn't have an artificial eye, just no eye. I'll call her Grace. Grace confided in me one day that she had lost her eye during a carjacking in a major metropolitan city. She had been shot 3 times and raped, she said. Her husband was in the military and was overseas in combat. He would be coming home from his tour and retiring after this tour. She regularly sent him care packages of personal supplies and food. She had an adult daughter, but her daughter was estranged and she didn't get to speak to her often. Grace was always lecturing me to call your mom. It means a lot. She bought a new SUV when her husband's military pay came in, and he told her to get one as soon as it came in. It was pretty nice, nicer than any vehicle I could ever afford. I visited her house a couple of times. She had a large parrot that talked. She said it missed her husband terribly, and sometimes when she let it out of its cage, she would tease it and say, "Where's Papa?" And the bird would look around for him. Although she was a little odd, I figured I would be too if the things that had happened to her had happened to me. But some of the things she said sometimes threw me off a little, and I started getting some spidey sense feelings from time to time. One day I was reading the news online, and there was an article about an inmate at the state corrections prison who was suing the state for maltreatment. I think I read it 3 or 4 times because something about the name seemed familiar to me. At first, I thought I might have heard about the story before. But when I got to work the next day, it struck me that the name was Grace's husband's name. It was a fairly unusual name. I kept it to myself, because who knows, there might be more than one person with that name, but it kept bugging me. One day, near the holidays, she said he was coming home on leave, and she was excited to see him. She would have to drive far upstate to the base where he was stationed. I was so happy for her, and it seemed like the person in the paper was someone else entirely. After the holidays, he went back to the Middle East. Things went back to normal. But Grace started getting really stressed, saying that he might have to stay after this tour as well. They needed the money because temping wasn't making enough. And the military offers a lot to stay in. She was hoping he wouldn't have to. She began giving me gifts, both of food and trinkets. I usually have a suspicion of gifts, and I associate them with someone trying to make up for something. I know, it's a pessimistic outlook, but it's rooted in my childhood. Anyway, it made my senses tingle again. At one point, I started turning down the gifts. I also felt uncomfortable visiting her anymore. She just began to unsettle me. As spring came, I was reading the news, and I saw a follow-up to the story about the prisoner, and I got curious, so I looked up the entire lawsuit. He had gotten a 6-figure settlement, but he was still not getting out. As I read the entire transcript, I was horrified to find out that the man who was suing for maltreatment was a rapist and a child molester. He had been in prison for over 20 years, and his parole was denied because he was listed as dangerous and violent. As I browsed the legal site, I came across some of his earlier court proceedings. Apparently, he had years added to his sentence because when one of his victims was about 5, his girlfriend had brought her in for a visit and had helped him get away with molesting her in the jail visitation room. He got caught. She somehow escaped criminal charges, but they took the child away. I still had no proof that this was Grace's husband, but I was so freaked out by the story that I had nightmares for several nights in a row about what I had read, and working with Grace became excruciatingly difficult. Things that had never alarmed me before began to actually frighten me. One day, she left for lunch and wanted to go somewhere in her car, but I said I brought my own lunch and wanted to stay at work. She seemed overly cranky about it. After lunch, I was working for about an hour when I realized she hadn't returned from lunch. During my break, I went for a walk, which I usually did with Grace. She still hadn't returned. As I rounded the corner, She pulled up in her SUV. I told her that I was worried something had happened and that the supervisors were asking about her. She was angry and said I should have covered for her better. I was kind of offended. She then told me to get in the vehicle and that she would give me a ride back to work. I told her I would just walk back. It was just around the block, for heaven's sake. She suddenly yelled at me. "Why don't you get in the car?" "Just get in," I said. "No thanks, I'll meet you back there." When she finally got into the office, she sat down and said in a low voice, "Why won't you ride in my car? Why are you refusing to come to my house? I know something is wrong. What's the problem?" I said there was no problem. What could be the problem? There's no problem. She said, "Oh, there is a problem," under her breath. The supervisor came over and asked to talk to her, and she was let go. She told me I should have covered for her. It's not really in my nature unless there is something life or death though. Then she left angry. The supervisor saw her yell at me, and then they talked to me. They said not to feel bad. They had let her go for other reasons. She had falsified information on her entrance paperwork, and it was some serious stuff. I was like, was it about her background? And they said, yeah. Did you know about her husband? And I said I thought he was overseas. They just shook their heads. I didn't ask, and they didn't tell me anymore. For years after, even after I got married and changed my name and moved all over creation, I was still afraid of her. And the husband, because it turns out it was him. And he was the one who had shot her. And even though he did that and harmed children, she was still faithful to him. I kept an eye on his sex offender status for years. One day, he was paroled. So he was actually out there somewhere, terrifying. But one year, when I searched for his status, it said he was no longer registered as an offender because he was deceased. I had never looked up Grace, but when I did, I saw that she was also deceased. I have no idea how either of them died. I just saw the death notices. I hope their child or children are okay somewhere. I can't imagine being a close family member to those two. I sometimes wonder what might have happened the day she wanted me to get in her car. Even back then, I had read enough true crime stories to know some possible outcomes. TLDR, I once had a coworker whose husband shot her in the face, taking her eye, and molested her child and other children, and she stuck by him and built an entire story about him being a soldier overseas when he was really in prison for violent rape and molestation, which she had some collaboration in. They are both long deceased. What if someone was secretly stalking you for a whole month? Probably late in the queue, but my story goes like such. This happened with one of my friends. This happened in 2017 in a part of Mumbai. She was proper corporate exec, working late nights and partying hard on weekends, a very easygoing and sweet person. Unlike most of her friends, she used to stay all alone in a very eloquently rich neighborhood. Like any usual times at the bar, a guy reached her and asked if she'd be interested for a drink. She accepted it and spoke for a bit, but he insisted on leaving the bar together. She denied it, and his persistence put her off, so she left with her friends. Another week passed, she went to the same bar. The guy showed up again and offered her a drink. She denied it once more. A week later, she tried a new bar around town, and to her surprise, found the guy there too, repeating his drink offer routine. She politely declined and asked him to stop bothering her. He did, and nothing happened for a couple of weeks. A month passed with no signs of him, so she forgot he even existed. She usually went home pretty drunk and hid her keys under the doormat to avoid losing them. One of these weekends, she came home extremely drunk with her date. They went inside, started making out on her bed with the lights dimmed. The date removed a condom from his wallet but accidentally dropped it on the floor and bent down to pick it up. Then he stood up frantically and started insisting she come with him into the bathroom, begging her repeatedly until she agreed. As soon as they went inside, he swiftly locked the bathroom door. Scared, he mentioned there was someone under her bed. She dismissed it, thinking he was just too drunk and imagining things. But he kept begging her to believe him and to call the cops. After around 10 minutes of insistence, she finally dialed the police. The cops arrived and had to force their way into the apartment. They came in and the date frantically explained the situation to one of the officers, asking them to check under the bed. The cop instructed a subordinate to look. What they saw shook the woman to her core. Under her bed was the same guy who had been offering her drinks repeatedly. he was arrested on the spot. During interrogation, he admitted to stalking her for about a month, knowing her keys, schedule, and friends. If it weren't for the quick thinking of her date, the stalker could have raped or even killed her later. The realization of how carefully he had planned everything left a lasting chill. Months of stalking, knowledge of her routine, and his persistence could have ended tragically. Thankfully, she survived, but the memory of the fear and danger would haunt her for years.